Taiwanese cuisine may be best known for its street snacks and bubble tea, but its food traditions run much deeper, with tasty infusions from Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, and of course, China. So, as global tastes evolve and grow in sophistication, how can Taiwan raise its culinary profile while preserving the traditions that make it unique? I'm Fred Xie, and you're watching Connected on Taiwan Plus. To explore the intertwined roots of cross-strait food culture, we're joined from London by Fuchsia Dunlop. She's a chef, an award-winning food writer, and leading expert on Chinese cuisine. Fuchsia is the author of 7 books, including the acclaimed memoir Shark's Fin and Sichuan Pepper, and her latest, Invitation to a Banquet. Hi, Fuchsia. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Fred.
Let's start with your story. What first sparked your interest in cuisine in this part of the world?
Well, I'd always loved cooking since early childhood and written down recipes in my diary. And then after graduating from university, where I studied English literature, I had an editorial job where I was just sub-editing material about East Asia. And I went backpacking to China in 1992, and I was just fascinated. And I started learning Mandarin in evening classes. I spent a summer in Taipei at the Mandarin Training Center. And then I got a scholarship to go and study in Sichuan, in Chengdu. And I was supposed to be doing something very academic, but I very quickly got distracted by the amazing food that was just everywhere in the streets around the university in Chengdu. And I started learning to cook on a very casual basis, really, with friends that I made in Chengdu. And then by asking little restaurants around the university if I could go and study in their kitchens. And then finally, a friend and I heard about this famous Sichuan cooking school, the Sichuan Higher Institute of Cuisine. And we persuaded them to give us some private classes. And then later on, when I'd finished at the university, the cooking school invited me to enroll as a regular trainee chef on a sort of chef's foundation course. So that's how it happened, really. And I just did this cooking course for fun because I loved the food and I wanted to learn about it. And I never would have imagined that it would become a career.
So what's kept you interested all these years?
Well, I think it's just an inexhaustible subject, because I think no one understands food like the Chinese. Food has been at the heart of Chinese culture since the beginnings of Chinese civilization. And I think somehow that it's a culture that expresses itself through food. You know, as you know, people talk about food all the time. And it's a huge, empire of a country with such regional diversity. And, I've been studying Chinese food now for 30 years, and I still feel like a beginner in the sense that every time I go to China, I go to new places, I try new dishes, meet new people. So I think it's a subject that one could never, ever find boring.
So I'm interested. There's a recent global survey of 25,000 people across 24 different countries. It ranked Italian cuisine as the most popular, followed by Chinese and Japanese. Taiwan cuisine came in 17th, just below the British cuisine. Why do you think Italian cuisine is so universally popular?
Well, I think it's very approachable. So there are certain kinds of Italian food, so pizza and pasta, which are not only inexpensive, and pizza is available everywhere in restaurants, all over the world really, but certainly in Britain. And also it's quite easy to make to an extent at home. And the other thing is in Europe, for someone in Britain, for example, it's very easy to go to Italy, because I think some of the ways that people get to know foreign cultures and cuisines, it's from travel, it's from restaurants where they live, and Italian has both those sort of qualifications. But I think it's very approachable. That's one of the main things.
So what do you think Taiwan can do to raise its game?
Well, invite lots of people to come and taste Taiwanese food. I mean, I think that, we have, for example, in London, we have some Taiwanese restaurants and they are, showcasing some of the flavors of Taiwan. You just want people to taste it and to visit Taiwan and try it.
And we're increasingly seeing dishes like pickled cabbage fish, 酸菜鱼, and 串串 skewers gain popularity in Taiwan. But many of these trends seem to fizzle out quickly. What makes some of Chinese food trends stick in Taiwan while others don't?
Well, I think it's just that if you have a very dynamic food culture, which you do, then people are always in search of novelty. And I think it's inevitable that food trends will come and go because consumers just want something new. I guess you have some food trends perhaps that are just gimmicky, which might come and go very quickly, but others just, profoundly delicious culinary ideas that will stick. But I think dishes come in and out of fashion, and even fantastic dishes come and go. I mean, just when I was a student in Chengdu, for example, guoba rou pian, this dish with crispy rice with a sort of sauce with pork and vegetables poured over it, bit of sweet and sour flavor. That was a very classic dish. And then it disappeared for about 25 years. And now, interestingly, it seems to be coming back. So I think it's just part of gastronomic life.
But on the flip side, since you spent so much time in China, are there any Taiwanese-inspired foods that have gained popularity in China that stuck?
Well, I was talking to my Chinese translator, He Yujia, about this the other day, and she was saying that she thought that the things that were most popular were the niu rou mian and sanbeiji, some dishes like that have really stuck and become very popular.
Taiwan, with its complex history, has made it our people is quite accepting of foreign cuisines. Nowadays, you can find spicy hot pot everywhere you go, whereas spicy spices are quite foreign 50 years ago in Taiwan. Why do you think that is? And is China on a similar trajectory?
Yes, I mean, I think we all live in a much more interconnected and globalized world, and people are exposed to all kinds of different regional foods, wherever they live almost. And I think, already in Taiwan, you have this very mixed culture with fascinating, the influence of the old Fujian style Chinese cuisine, indigenous cuisine, all the food traditions of the mainlanders who came over in 49, including some sort of spicy Sichuan and Hunan food. And also the Japanese influence. So you already have a very sort of inclusive and open-minded food culture. And I think it's the same in China, that in mainland China, that you have areas like Jiangnan. So in Shanghai, for example, young people love spicy Hunanese and Sichuan food, and their parents really didn't. So I think we're in a period of a lot of movement, of people traveling and eating different flavors. But at the same time, I think that sometimes, it's easy to feel that the pace of modern life, everything's changing and we're losing track of tradition. But I think that tradition is a very slippery concept, and cuisines are always dynamic forms of culture that are recreated every day. So, as already discussed, I mean, in Taiwan, you have this incredible fusion cuisine. And it's the same in Sichuan, where I lived for a long time, that in Sichuan, if you think of the emblem of Sichuanese cuisine, ma la, numbing and hot flavors, you have Sichuan pepper, which is a really ancient indigenous Chinese spice, paired with the chili, which is a fairly recent modern, import from the Americas. So even when you think about, in this case, traditional Sichuanese cooking, it's actually a fusion. And you see that across Chinese culture, the influence of the Silk Road trade, of the ocean trade from the Ming Dynasty. It's all mixed up all the time.
I'm so glad you brought up Sichuan pepper, because I believe 20 years ago it was really hard to get them in supermarkets, but now it's my staple at home. You've mentioned before that the importance of kougan, or mouthfeel, in cuisine across this region. Can you explain what that is and why it can be challenging for some Western diners to appreciate?
Well, So obviously the tactile experience of eating is important wherever you are, but I just think in the West that we have a more limited appreciation of texture than people do in East Asia. So the range of textures that we typically enjoy are more limited. I mean, everybody enjoys crisp, deep fried foods or succulent textures. But in East Asia, you appreciate a whole range of textures that Westerners often find really disgusting. So slippery, slimy, gristly, the kind of crunch of cartilage. Many Westerners find these really disgusting, and yet they're not only sort of eaten in East Asia, but positively enjoyed. And I think that's because for people in East Asia, the experience of kogan is absolutely at the heart of the pleasure of eating. So it's really unusual to discuss the qualities of a dish with someone, for example, Chinese, who doesn't talk about the mouthfeel, whether it's slippery or cui cui or QQ, in Taiwan. So I think it's a much more important part of food culture. And that, for me, as a Westerner, when I first traveled to China, there were lots of things that I found really unappetizing, because they had, ingredients with no flavor, but just slithery textures like jellyfish or goose intestines, which are a really popular Sichuan hot pot ingredient. But over time, with exposure, I have come to really appreciate these textures. And it was just like unlocking a door to an extra dimension of gastronomy. I mean, I think it makes eating much more exciting if you appreciate the texture as well as the flavor and the aroma and so on.
Before we move on, I want to bring in the focus to Taiwan. According to data from Taiwan's Economy Ministry, the local food and beverage industry hit a record high in annual revenue in 2024, while prime cooperation with hundreds of restaurants across multiple brands and chains came up on top with $740 million in earnings. Other big chains, mostly fast casual brands inspired by Japanese cuisine, Western fusion, and Chinese flavors, also made it to the top 10. So, Fuchsia, we can see on the graph that Japan-influenced chains seems to dominate Taiwan's dining scene, but you've also pointed out that the concept of gepeng, to cut and to cook, has roots in Chinese culinary traditions. So how do you see this back and forth influence between Chinese and Japanese cuisine playing out in Taiwan?
Well, I mean, I think, in Taiwan, you have a really, it's very interesting how integrated Japanese food into Taiwanese food culture. And for someone like me who spent a lot of time in the mainland, one of the most interesting things is how kind of mainstream Japanese food is in Taiwan in a way that it still isn't in the mainland. And I think things like, sushi and sashimi, which in the mainland are still not so popular. Mainlanders are not so keen on raw flavors, but they seem to be very popular in Taiwan. But I think it's just, obviously for historical reasons, Taiwanese people are very familiar with Japanese food. And it's just natural that there's going to be a back and forth. And of course, historically, so many parts of Japanese cuisine came from China. So not only gepeng, this phrase that you mentioned, but, tea and tofu and ramen, all of these very important parts of contemporary Japanese food culture actually have Japanese roots. But I think it's just a sign that, wherever you have contact between different peoples in different nations, from the Silk Road until now, we're all borrowing from each other, learning from each other, finding delicious things, adopting them, adapting them.
Growing up in New Zealand, I was fascinated with British TV, especially cooking shows. And for the mentorship system, like what the French Roux brother did in the UK, which really helped elevated the country's standard of cooking, what do you think Taiwan can learn from the UK's experience when it comes to training the next generation of chefs?
Well, so I'm not sure what the situation is, specifically in Taiwan, but sort of in mainland China, so many chefs have told me about the old habit of liu yi shou, keeping back a trick or two, and this idea that chefs would be quite jealous custodians of their skills and they didn't want to teach apprentices in case they became commercial rivals. But I think that's changing a bit. So, for example, the cooking school that I went to, I mean, the whole point was that it was the open transmission of culinary skills skills to the next generation. So I think that, the other thing that's very interesting is that quite a few Chinese chefs have said that in the older generation, for previous generations, the shifu, the master, had all the power, and there were many apprentices who really wanted to learn his skills. But it's actually turned around now, and you have very skilled chefs who find it hard to get apprentices. There aren't enough people, that I hear all the time, there aren't enough young people who really want to seriously train in the Chinese culinary arts, because it's tough, it's difficult and challenging and very hard work. So I think now master chefs, if they find someone who's serious about learning, should be very glad that they have a willing apprentice. And of course, the more sharing of skills, the more chance there is of traditional culinary culture and skills surviving to the next generation.
So when we think about upscaling food culture, Michelin Guide always comes to mind. It began covering Taiwan in 2018. The first ever 3-star went to a restaurant called Le Palais, which is Cantonese-inspired restaurant here in Taipei. You've previously noted a Cantonese bias in the West. Do you think that still holds true?
Well, I think there was a Cantonese bias in the West because most of the early immigrants bringing Chinese food to America, to Britain, to everywhere were Cantonese. And there was also a Cantonese bias, for example, in Chengdu when I lived there, because Hong Kong was very rich. South China got rich first. And so Cantonese became the prestige cuisine that if you wanted to go out for a special dinner, Cantonese was the flash, expensive option. So I think it's partly about money and prestige. And now that, other regions are richer as well, I don't think that you have this inevitable Cantonese bias. And I think it's really just up to sort of restaurateurs and chefs to come up with imaginative ways of presenting their cuisine. And sometimes that might be a sort of elevated form. But I think also that Michelin did get a lot of pressure from people feeling that it marginalized non-European cuisines and that it only favored very prissy restaurants with starched tablecloths and all this kind of thing. And I think they have responded to that. So now they have the Bib Gourmand, the recognition for restaurants that may be very casual. And so I think it has become more inclusive. I think for me, the more of a problem with the old Michelin style was that they seemed to favor restaurants that were assessed by individual guides. And that, of course, was really problematic for Asian restaurants where you would have food served family style, because you can't go there on your own and have a proper meal. But I understand that now that's not always the case, and you do see restaurants in the Michelin Guide where you can only eat family style.
So I have your book here, Invitation to a Banquet. We're also seeing a sort of revival for the Taiwanese banquet culture, but more broadly speaking, how can countries preserve their food heritage while still allowing it to evolve?
Well, in a sense, I think that evolution and change is inevitable, and part of that is losing some traditions. You don't really carry on doing things that have no modern relevance. So I think that creating conditions where people can open restaurants, where they can afford to open restaurants, doing all kinds of different sort of food, encouraging young people to see cuisine and gastronomy as part of their culture and an important part of their heritage, that helps. But yes, in the end, it's like if people are interested and they want to eat things, then, there will be a market, and then hopefully people will go on cooking them.
Are there any recipes in your book, Invitation to a Banquet, that sort of addresses this problem? And some of the dishes that we don't find generally at homes in China or in Taiwan, are there any dishes as such that you would like to preserve?
Well, I think that, in China, there are a lot of, what you call gongfu cai, very elaborated, technically challenging dishes, which are not very commercially viable because they require a lot of labor and skill, and sometimes people are not willing to learn it. So dishes like, and this is the dish I think that appeared in Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, that fantastic film, which was, I think, Ko San Si, which is a Jiangnan dish where you have very, very fine threads of ingredients, including bamboo shoot and jinhua ham and chicken, put into a sort of cup and steamed and then turned upside down. And it's a real daogong, sort of knife skill dish. And that's one that you really don't see in restaurants very often because it's technically challenging. So I hope that some people will carry on taking the Chinese art of cutting to an extreme degree, even though it's not very commercial, because it's a beautiful part of the culinary arts.
So what are you trying to achieve with this book?
Well, I suppose, I mean, originally, although it's now translated into Chinese, my purpose really was to write it for English speakers, because I just feel that in the world in general, Chinese food is so universally popular. I mean, there are Chinese restaurants everywhere. Everyone loves Chinese food, but at the same time, Chinese has not historically had the acknowledgement and respect it deserves as a serious cuisine, as a grand gastronomic culture. And so what I wanted to do was write a book that that looked at many different sides of Chinese culinary culture, to really ask, what is Chinese food? What makes it Chinese? But look at it from a sensory point of view, historical, cultural, and just to show readers something of its extraordinary complexity and sophistication.
So unfortunately, we're running out of time, but for people who haven't been to Taiwan, what would you recommend they try first? And personally, are there any favorite Taiwanese dishes of yours?
Well, I think for me, I mean, I haven't been to Taiwan for a few years and I really hope to come again next year. But for me, the highlight was all the glorious street food. And I remember going to Tainan and eating the danzai mian, the gorgeous sort of noodles with pork sauce and a shrimp, and also heavenly fried oyster rolls with wangyou, with cool fat, which was so crisp and utterly delicious. I mean, I had those, I think, about 20 years ago, and I've never forgotten them.